Here's the noise a male or any turkey will make when they are like ready to bolt. So when they get freaked, they'll just be sitting there looking around and all of a sudden they'll go. That's no good. That means that turkey's gonna book. I'm Steven Rinella. I'm sitting here in the comfort of my own home, and this is The Breakdown. Hunt for the Wilder People. You're seeing a kid doing sort of a hunting or stalking scene, but it's obvious that the kid learned what he knows from watching hunting, stalking scenes in movies. You know, the application of the face stuff. Movie people, TV people love junk on people's faces. If you look at hunters that use a lot of face paint, oftentimes they're using face paint because they think face paint looks sweet. I was huge into Rambo when I was a little kid, and there's like a mud wall, and all of a sudden 2 eyes open on the wall made of mud, and it's like, oh my god, it's Rambo, it's not a wall of mud. His gun handling is so bad that I can't even address how bad it is. It's hard here to untangle moviness and reality. My theory about this is the kid has been instructed by their firearms expert to not put your finger on the trigger. That's what I think's going on here. He's stalking a bird, but he's doing these herky-jerky motions. And first off, if you're stalking something, the idea is that you're moving quietly and you're moving calmly and you're not putting off extra motion that's going to alert something's presence. Animals pick up movement, especially fast, jerky movements. If he had strong desires to actually get a bird and he winds up stalking a dove, he would hold that thing just still and wait till you actually see what you're going to shoot and then calmly raise it up. Not this. See, when he does draw a bead, I don't hate it. His hand's blocking, so I can't tell if he's using 2 eyes open or if he's just squinting 1 eye, which either case is fine. He's got a dominant right eye. He's shooting right-handed. That hand, his forward hand, which is very close to the trigger guard, it's not unacceptable. It's not great, but there is a way to shoot that way. But again, someone's told him, like, never put your finger on the trigger. So here he is drawing a bead, getting ready to shoot, but still, his rear grip hand doesn't have good control. It looks phony and it looks inept. But I think part of the point here is to demonstrate ineptitude. When he shoots, his report doesn't match his firearm. It appears he has a tube-fed .22 rifle. If someone were to shoot a .22 off a few hundred yards away right now, if I heard it, I'd be like, that was a .22. It's like a very crack-like report. And the other thing is there's no kick. The recoil is so light, it almost is recoilless. I can't think of how many TV shows and movies there's been where someone gets blown back by a shot. You see it again and again. The old classic, boom, fall over. No. I seen it happen one time in my life. It was to me. I was 11 or 12, and I shot a turkey load out of a 12-gauge shotgun that I was unprepared for. It was poorly matched. It was a very lightweight shotgun paired with a very heavy shot shell. It shot me back a little bit, but no, it doesn't happen.
You get any food? The hell is that?
Salad. Well, I'd like to see you do any better.
Yeah, that's like an old trope. Vegetarian is a Native American word for a bad hunter. If you're fishing and you get seaweed on your hook, or you call it a grass bass, there's a long history of sort of like vegetation-based bad hunting jokes. When it comes to wild edibles, like non-meat varieties, in my circle of friends, we tend to focus on the really, really high-quality ones that are inarguably very good. Ramps, which is kind of a cross between a wild onion and garlic. Tons of wild berries are all great. Wide variety of wild mushrooms are really phenomenal. Next up, we have The Hunter. Oh, this is the Willem Dafoe one? Yeah, this movie's ridiculous, man. If you want to watch a real good hunting movie, get Derisu Uzala, which means The Hunter, but it's in Japanese. And that is a Kurosawa movie called The Hunter, about Siberian hunters. So if you're going to watch a movie called The Hunter, watch that one, not this one. But in this one, This like pharmaceutical or biochem company wants to get their hands on a Tasmanian tiger. Everyone knows that, of course, Tasmanian tigers went extinct decades ago, but there's the idea that it's a Lazarus species, meaning the Tasmanian tigers went extinct, but then every year people see them. It's sort of the Bigfoot of Tasmania, but that's not a great analogy because Bigfoots never existed and people are always thinking they're finding them. But in the case of the Tasmanian tiger, it wasn't like a legit species. It was a marsupial predator, lived in Tasmania. It was through habitat loss and overhunting and predator control was wiped off the face of the earth. And now there's a lot of sort of excitement about finding one. So every year some drunk guy will be driving home and sees one cross the road and people get excited about it over again. But so far no one's been able to actually produce one. The gripe I have with the movie is that it suffers from a thing that movies often suffer from, which is called magical backpack syndrome. Meaning, Willem Dafoe sets off into the wild yonder to go hunt and trap and get himself a Tasmanian tiger. And he's got a little rucksack, but he, throughout the movie, produces the most stunning array of physical goods from a little teeny backpack, like a mini pack that has a pickup truck worth of gear in it. Here he is, he's been out in the woods for so long, he's growing frustrated, and all of a sudden he wakes up and here's the damn thing staring down at him. He's also got some hides hung out. Not sure what his intentions are with the hides. If you want to preserve a hide in the field, like you're out for an extended period of time, what he needs to do is he needs to get it fleshed. So he needs to get all the fat, muscle, connective tissue off it and get it down to what we would call it clean leather. And the best way to preserve it is to salt it. You can only salt the hide once you have it completely fleshed. If you don't completely flesh it and get it all ready and then salt it, it's a nightmare for whoever then later has to try to salt it. It makes it nearly impossible, so you want to watch out for that. He's in that wet-ass dank cave. One thing that you don't want is anything to be wet. You don't want meat to be wet. You don't want hides to be wet. Wet leads to rot. It leads to stink. Don't get anything wet ever. How well can you see this? My kid who's out with his little 410 shotgun and got a weasel. So this weasel, it's a long-tail weasel, was fleshed and stretched inside out. Certain animals are fleshed and stretched, fur side out. This is inside out. So this is case skin. You can hear it. That's how dry it is. Moisture would be the enemy of this thing. Right now, it would go off to the tanner in just this form. Here's a hide that's been tanned, for instance. This is the muskrat's hide. It was what we call tube skinned. Same as the weasel. The only incisions were here, and it's pulled off like a sock. This was tube skinned, but tanned. So you can turn it inside out, and that's tanned leather. This is garment ready. You can go have a hat made out of this thing right now. It's funny the way our world is full of leather. Shoes, couches, upholstery, car interiors, and no one finds it offensive. But when you tan it and don't remove the hair and it becomes fur, man, do people get touchy. The gun's a little out there. You can tell it's a little producery. Someone thought that gun would look sweet. Probably not what this guy would be toting with them. It's a pretty sophisticated gun. It's got sophisticated optics. But he's got a Quake sling, like one of the best, cheapest slings out there. The problem is Quake slings, they use horrible hardware. So cut the hardware off and stitch on Grove Tech hardware, and then you got like a really nice sling. I can't tell if he did that, but it's just funny because there's a sort of incongruity between his rifle, its optics, and the sling, but it is a really good sling once you fit it with good hardware. It's kind of a touching scene because it seems as though the Tasmanian tiger kind of resigns itself to being shot. It's so lonely that it wants to die because it's the last one left. Willem Dafoe, he's going to shoot it, feels horrible, but he's saving it. A fate worse than death would be that it would be captured and experimented on, and he just wants it to rest in peace. I'm very reluctant here to talk about shot placement on an extinct species. I would never advocate any kind of shot placement on a Tasmanian tiger. But were I in a situation where God came down and said, you must shoot this Tasmanian tiger, I would tuck that shot right in behind the front shoulder blade, a little lower than halfway up and down the body. From this here, it looks like he's got really good shot placement. And hats off to the special effects people, because that initial impact looks really legitimate. This movie's riddled with problems earlier on, but this scene, for what it is, there's nothing really wrong with this scene. In terms of just getting emotional, shooting something, I have seen well in excess of a dozen people get emotional and cry after killing their first big game animal. The emotion they're experiencing often has to do with someone having a sort of reckoning with all of the meat they've consumed through their whole life and kind of being divorced from this cycle of life and death. And they have the experience of going out and killing an animal that they'll eat. And there's a deep gratitude that extends from it, maybe an acknowledgement of a sacrifice, and to confront it and wrestle with it is emotional, and it's a little bit cathartic. And I'll point out that it hasn't happened to me because I was introduced to hunting and fishing, the reality of death, at a really young age. I never thought of it as anything unusual, but I like to see people go through it because it allows me to, in some ways, live something vicariously through them. He's carrying the animal in a curious way. It wasn't long ago I was hunting with my daughter and we got a rabbit and she was carrying it that way. It was kind of funny to me that that was sort of her go-to carry. There's a sort of mid-sized animal that can't be carried just, holding it in your hand. Like imagine you're carrying a bucket, right? You're carrying a bucket by the bail. A lot of things you can just carry that way. For instance, you grab a rabbit by the foot and you can carry it along. You can grab a beaver by the back foot and carry it along with you. When people are dealing with a mid-sized animal, something up to 100 pounds could be comfortably carried over your shoulders, and that does happen, and it's kind of this like domineering pose, but it's good because it distributes the weight in a nice way. You gotta be careful of its parasite load. Wouldn't want to put a coyote, for instance, around you like this, really, because they can have a lot of mites and fleas that can get off and get in your hair and they'll bite you and it itches. You could drag it too, but the problem with dragging something that's got a fur you want to retain is you invariably, you drag it and you rub the hair off and create bald spots on it. So we'll often drag deer, elk, antelope, all kinds of stuff like that where you're not worried about if you rub some hair away. Something where you want that hide, you don't want to drag it, especially across the kind of rough ground he's in here. You wouldn't carry it like this, but we're stepping into the director's mind here. It's meant to be that he's remorseful. It's more of an affectionate sort of carry. Alpha. We're looking at some Ice Age hunters. They're hunting a relic species of Ice Age bison. Unfortunately, no one is around right now who can tell us how Ice Age hunters did their hunting. However, that doesn't mean we're totally at a loss, because we have a lot of archaeological sites where we can see where hunts played out, butchering sites, remnants of tools, weapons. Also, we have from later periods where chroniclers or historians or travelers would watch how indigenous hunters went about the chore of hunting bison and what strategies they used. And you can wind up putting together like a pretty decent picture of what went on all those years ago. They're all lined out in a big, long line. If you're stalking and you want to diminish your profile, what you generally want to do is line out so that your prey, it's not seeing things lined out like this, it's seeing things lined out like this. It looks smaller. It's less menacing than if we come at it like this, where you're creating a wall. They're sort of presenting this big line of people, maximizing its view so that it can't be missed. Yet they're crawling, which I imagine the filmmaker thinks looks cool. They got mud on their face, which people love, from Bear Grylls on down, that they can just add dramatic appeal. Then we see kind of like how ferocious they are, because he's like eating the ants off his arm. Sure, that's fine. They're not going to kill you. They taste bitter. When you eat an ant, a lot of ants, it tastes like if you took a 9-volt battery and put the prongs against your tongue. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Dude's hungry. What's funny then is they go through all this stuff to stalk, and then they get out to the moment where you're like, okay, we're not gonna get any closer, we're gonna blow them out. And some bitch like goes like, like does a big like hoorah yell, which kind of undoes all the work you just did toward stalking it. I also don't like their armaments, their weapons. Handheld spears, like what they're using, were probably used more for thrusting. They probably weren't hurled or thrown, but I want to see what goes on from here. They are driving a herd of bison off a cliff. And that did happen in prehistoric times. There are some bone beds in Europe and there are bone beds in North America where it appears as though literally tens of thousands of bison were killed at the edge of cliffs. Oftentimes the cliffs weren't as high as what we're seeing here. And it would be more that they would get maimed and mangled when they fall off fairly low cliffs. And you'll sometimes see the bone bed and spear points extend for a couple miles out from the foot of the cliff, meaning all these crippled animals are landing on each other and breaking bones and getting hurt and wandering away and then being kind of rounded up and slaughtered by the hunters. And what might have seemed like a pretty gruesome display. I one time was looking at something this researcher did, examining a bison jump called Bonfire Shelter in Texas. And they wound up drawing up a sort of digital display of what it would look like from a bison eye view. So it imagines that this animal's moving 35 miles an hour, being scared by something that's running across the landscape. And when you watch this video of what it looks like to be moving at that speed, at that eye height toward a cliff, by the time the animal would realize that that cliff was there, it's too late, man. You got such a mass of animals behind you, pushing you. It's really quite surprising. So now you can go to the mountains in Wyoming, you can go to the mountains in Montana, the mountains in Idaho, and find old drive lines where people build rock cairns or rock structures to herd bison where you want them to go when you're driving them off a cliff. Here they kind of take a little bit of a fanciful approach and they're suggesting that instead of building corrals or some kind of rock work to guide their movements, they throw a line of spears up to steer them. It's goofy, but it makes for a good scene. In fact, kind of like it. Oh no, nails. Nails coming back to finish them off. Blammo! The idea that you'd get charged and wounded by something you're hunting for isn't far off. It does happen. And there's certain species that are really famous for it. I one time wounded a moose and got charged and hit by the moose's antlers. He bowled me over. When it first happened, I got up and I felt where I got poked by its antler and my hands came back all coated with blood and I thought it was my blood and I was bleeding out and I was scared. But then I realized that it was blood from the moose's own brisket that had gotten all over my back and that's why I was getting blood on my hands. If you're watching a hunter approach an animal, you often approach it from behind it. You know, you might poke the eyeball with your arrow or poke the eyeball with the muzzle of your gun to see if you get any reaction from flinching. If you can touch something's eyeball and it doesn't do any movement, you can know it's dead. But yeah, man, if you're smart, you don't just go running up on stuff. You can get messed up doing that. Next, Django Unchained. That's a hell of a bottle. I've been shooting bottles since the beginning. Quick comment on snowshoes. Snowshoes are a funny thing because in real life, depending on the softness of the snow, snowshoes don't really become advantageous until snow gets to a certain depth. If you're what we call post-holing, meaning your foot is punching down through the snow and it's knee-deep, say, and every time you step, your foot crunches down into wet snow, snowshoes are great. They'll hold you up. Native Americans in the Great Lakes region where I grew up, we'd often read about how Native Americans like to hunt moose. But they would wait until the late winter when the snow was deep and crusty and moose and game animals would get hung up in the snow and have a hard time. But you could put snowshoes on and go out in the early morning when the snow was frozen and grease across that snow and actually outpace moose and deer and kill them. Humans like to shoot bottles. My sister-in-law's ranch, they have a whole place set up where you go just to shoot bottles. Shooting bottles is great, but Shooting bottles is no way to test accuracy. It's no way to test a firearm's performance. Because here's the problem. Bottles don't do what this guy's bottle does. He shoots a bottle and it just punches a clean hole through the bottle. That's not what happens. When you shoot bottles, they just break. It's part of the appeal, but it's also part of the downfall of bottle shooting, is that it doesn't tell you where exactly you hit. I like the snowman thing. That's a nice touch. Shot place, I mean, it's so fanciful. Meaning, if you were to take that firearm, a 6-shot revolver like he's got there, put it in a completely controlled environment where there was no room for human error, no movement or flinch or whatever, that firearm would not be capable of shooting a pattern like that. One shot out of a gun is not indicative of anything. You need to shoot a 3-shot pattern or a 5-shot pattern. And you look at how all those shots are going to be distributed. They're not all going to be in the same place. If you were to take that pistol and put it out at 50 yards, even let's say you put it out at 25 yards, no one is going to be able to take that pistol and fit them in anything much smaller than like a pie plate. It just isn't capable of it. There's all this kind of stuff that happens in movies around accuracy. It's kind of ridiculous. Things are inherently inaccurate. So let's say our hero takes a shot and punches the center out of a glass bottle. I would then say, I will bet you that you cannot do that a second time. And I'll venture to guess that when you just did that, you were off and got lucky. You want something that just betrays exact placement. So shooting a piece of cardboard, shooting a piece of paper, you want something where you can have a fine point of aim, where you can aim at something very small and see exactly where the bullets hit. But when I was a little kid, our old man would take a milk jug, fill it full of water, set it out 75 yards away. If you could hit that jug, you were ready to go hunting. Now, if I'm shooting at 100 yards, I want to see a grouping of bullets within an inch, meaning you could take 3 shots, they'd all fit inside an inch. That's a tight ass group. And that's the kind of accuracy you're looking for nowadays. Next up, the Hunger Games. If you're in a situation where you're not supposed to be hunting, the report of a rifle can be a real problem. Makes a loud noise, it's a dead giveaway. There used to be a thing like to be very careful about shooting twice. Because when you shoot once, it's hard to place it. You might be like somewhere out that way, I heard a shot. But once you're paying attention, you hear another shot, you're like, oh no, it was there. That's where that came from. The second one gives it away. But either way, just like a single shot alerts things to your presence. So if you're trying to be all sneaky and be like a poacher or violator and go where you're not supposed to go, a bow is a great option. A lot of poachers now use crossbows, generally easier than a traditional vertical bow and no sound, so you can be real quiet. She's got a pretty sweet looking homemade bow. When she goes to pull back, she was obviously instructed well and trained well, has pretty good archery form. Manufacturers of bows and arrows and associated equipment, they were very enthusiastic about this movie because they saw this whole new clientele. Like the archery industry had always catered to males of a certain age, from their 20s and 30s and 40s. But all of a sudden they saw this enormous market from teenaged women wanting to go out and buy bows, and so they received this movie quite enthusiastically. She gets lined up on this doe, but she doesn't have a good shot. She's only got a head and neck shot. It can be done, but it's not an ethical shot. A responsible hunter takes a shot that's going to be the quickest death, most humane death, most painless death you can deliver to the animal. And this is not a great example. The advantage of being in my own home right now is I have some visual aids I can show. This is a deer my old man shot accidentally in the head. And if you look in here, you can see what's cool about it is the old broadhead is still stuck in there. He was shooting a recurve bow with natural feather fletchings at a white-tailed doe. He was shooting at the deer's ribs, broadside shot. But the deer swung its head so fast, when it heard the string, it was like a thump noise when you let a bow go. There's even a term for it in hunting called it jumped the string, meaning that there's a time elapses between when an arrow leaves the bow and when it arrives at the target. What typically happens when something jumps the string is because it hears the noise and it loads up to bound. And so when you watch an animal in slow motion jump the string, it's crouching to load up and then spring away. And it drops their back and arrows often fly over. So when people talk about jumping the string, they're usually shooting over its back because its back dropped down. This deer was pretty far away. My old man shot and it swung its head and wound up catching that broadhead right directing its forehead and obviously stoned it, instantly dead. Here's another example talking about like neck shots. I one time was hiking in Idaho. I found this elk skeleton, and so I was looking at these different processes that come off the vertebra. And if you look here, it's a brand called Muzzy. There's a Muzzy broadhead in this vertebra. This hit this elk in the neck, missed the spinal cord by a 1/4 inch. This didn't kill it. It lodged into the bone. The bone healed around it, and it just rattles around in there. This thing died in the middle of the winter because it had naturally shed its antlers. So he walked around, I don't know how many years, with this Muzzy broadhead embedded in its bone because it didn't hit a lethal spot. What's funny is this company, their slogan is bad for the bone. But here we have it in a vertebra. They're zeroing in on the deer's nose. We'd say it's winding her, it's getting her wind. It's being implied that the deer smells her. Bears have a different thing they do when they smell it. They'll sometimes stand up on their back feet and put their nose up high and wave their nose around in the wind. And you'll see sometimes deer, when they're really smelling something, their tongue will actually get active. They'll work their tongue out and their tongue will work across their nose. And we'll even say that that deer is tasting the wind. You'll see them do that when they're really intently trying to smell. Or they might wave their nose, but here she's flaring her nostrils and taking some breaths. The hunter then crumples up the leaves to test the wind, to see what the wind's doing. That's great, like that's a good way to test the wind. One of the best wind testers in the world would be like the down from a cattail. If you shred the down from a cattail and throw it up, it'll blow. We'll use little containers, little bottles full of talc powder and squirt that powder into the wind to watch where it goes. I used to just take the breast feather from a grouse and kind of fluff the breast feather up and hang it from a piece of dental floss. And when I was stalking elk or whatever, I would tie that dental floss to the limb of my bow. And like that ruffled breast feather on that dental floss would blow out and you could see what the wind's doing. For those leaves to behave that way, it would take a hell of a wind. It's not that windy where she is. They got some kind of fan or something blowing. It's never that exaggerated. Especially chunks of leaves from the ground, they're gonna be a little bit wet. If the wind is strong enough to blow your indicator that vigorously, you don't need to wonder what the hell the way the wind's going because you can feel it blasting your hair off in that direction too. She's flushing the animal out. We'll oftentimes throw rocks to see if something's around. I'll do it hunting or not hunting. Sometimes I'll just be curious about what might be in some little hell hole or some little brush pile down below me. And I'll just toss a rock down to see if I hear something scurry or hear something stand up. A thing about that is in areas where there is a lot of rock fall, animals get really used to rock fall. So you might be going along in some high mountain stuff and kick a rock down. And that rock will go, and you're like, oh shit, that's gonna scare it. Like I shouldn't have done that. You realize all day long rocks are falling. Animals get immune to that sound of rocks falling. But in a very targeted, specific way like this, you could use a rock and throw it, or as she does, kind of slingshots it off her bowstring. You can do that to see if you can get something to move. Sure, the problem is once you get to move, it's moving. So you need to do it in a pretty informed way where you're trying to get it to stand up or move into an area where you might have a good shot at it.
When you kill it.
So here again, man, she's got that tree blocking the vitals. And she's very conscientious and careful. The deer's got to take another step and then she'll have a good shot. So like all this kind of restraint and care, but then some person yells off in the background and spooks it, and then she takes a Hail Mary at it anyway. So the fact that she would then throw a Hail Mary after exercising such caution and precision is a little out of character for what I can tell about this individual. But, you know, you also got to tell a story, right? So it naturally pushes them into stupid directions.
It was the first deer I've seen in a year. Now I have nothing.
Okay. He picks up a rock and hucks it. They must have such deep familiarity with each other that she knows that the simple fact of him picking up a rock means he knows that there are some quail right there. Either way, picks up a rock, throws it, flushes the birds, gets a shot. I have flushed quail by hucking a rock to get him to jump. The shot is really, really something. To shoot a quail out of the air in a brushy landscape like that would put you in the absolute top echelon of archers ever if you were able to do that consistently. Daddy's home, too.
I'll have one shotgun, please, Santa, and gobs of bullets.
No, Cupcake. No, I'm sorry. No, the men do the hunting. You ladies cook what we kill.
Excuse me?
When Mel Gibson there is explaining that men do the hunting and women cook and clean what we kill, anthropologists have looked at that a lot. It seems that Neanderthals had less sexual dimorphism and that perhaps men and women hunted equally. The suite of injuries that they'll see on Neanderthal remains, meaning like skull fractures, various broken bones, they find that those injuries are in line with the same injuries that we see with bull riders. Neanderthals had a confrontational style of hunting, meaning they were in close with animals and getting injured by animals and fighting with animals. And they see those suites of injuries on both males and females. Today, in the United States, hunting participation is 90% male. When you go buy a hunting license, you put down your address, your social security number. Like, we know who you are, right? There's no mystery. I remember there's a hunting demographics guy talking one time where he explained that women that hunt tend to be the oldest child or tend to not have male siblings, where the dad was actually put in this position where he's like, I don't have a boy to bring, so I'll bring her. It's just a shitty reality about male women hunting tendencies.
Cradle the stock, okay?
Yeah, I get it. Can I shoot the damn thing or not?
Yeah, that's the spirit. Take a deep breath.
She's using a light gauge shotgun, fitted with a scope, which you could do, doesn't really make a whole ton of sense, but that's what she's doing. They're talking very loudly, which would spook turkeys, but then you have a lot of suburban turkeys in this country that aren't going to be scared away by people talking. You could be in someone's yard in New Jersey and find turkeys there nowadays. There's more turkeys now than there's ever been in the history of our country.
And then squeeze that trigger as you're letting it out.
Megan, are you sure this is what you want to do?
There's a lot going on in this scene. She demonstrates this sort of bloodlust, and Mel Gibson's trying to like reinforce the bloodlust. Will Ferrell's kind of like, are you sure that you really want to be this way? They're having kind of this national dialogue about hunting here as this little girl bears down on a turkey in herself, defying some kind of gender stereotype. Marky Mark here, he gets out a little squawker. That collar is the easiest way to make a rudimentary turkey call. It's just, you can't mess it up. You really just go like this and you get a turkey call. The harder it is to make a basic sound with the call, it just so happens that that call is probably the most nuanced and allows you the greatest vocabulary. Serious turkey hunters tend to use three types of calls. There's a box call. It's a wooden box. You got a paddle. This is the paddle. And you chalk. That's chalk on there. And it really is, you just can hold it. That's a yelp with a box call. This one's called a slate or a pot and peg, pot call, slate call, a glass. Traditionally, they were made with slate. Like here's one that has a legit piece of slate. You also can make the same sounds with a piece of glass that you scratch up. You can make a variety of hen sounds. I've killed a lot of turkeys with this noise, nothing but. That's all it takes. Then there's a final classification of a call called a diaphragm call. You'll just hear in common vernacular, people say a reed, or sometimes people call it a mouth call. The body is taped. There's a little horseshoe-shaped piece of aluminum crimping a piece of latex. You can buy condoms at the drugstore and stretch that same condom latex and get one of these. The first thing you want to learn how to do is just put it in your mouth and make a noise. There's a noise, and then you can start forming turkey vocalizations. Here's the noise a turkey will make when they are like ready to bolt. So when they get freaked, they'll just be sitting there looking around, and all of a sudden they'll go. That's no good. That means that turkey's gonna book. Then there's like a hen's yelp. There's a whole 100 things you can do with this. They make gobbles, purrs, clucks, kikis.
Stand your ground, kid. Take the shot, kid. Take the shot. Take the shot.
Hollywood has a reputation among hunters as being adversarial to hunting, and hunters are reckless buffoons and idiots, the worst of the worst, right? So that perpetuates the stereotype. And here, you know, it only makes sense that the guy who's vocal about let's kill the thing, and in the end, there's a hunting accident, and he gets shot in his arm and wounded. And, you know, of course, my father got shot in the foot in a hunting accident. Late 40s, early 50s, hunting exploded. Like GIs coming back from World War II really took to hunting in record numbers. An editor of Outdoor Life, I think it was, commented, "You can't teach an entire generation of men to camp out in the woods and shoot guns and not expect them to become hunters." And that was true. Hunting took off, but hunting safety didn't. There were a lot of hunting accidents. That was before we had hunter safety rules and all these things, and before best practices were widely understood. Since then, you have to pass through certain hurdles to learn safety. When I was a kid, you had to be a lot older to hunt than you do now in most states. Like, for instance, where I grew up, you had to be 12 to hunt deer with a bow. You had to be 14 to hunt with a gun for big game. The trend now has been to lower those ages as long as you have a parent with you. I take my kids hunting. My oldest is 9. He has yet to hunt big game because in the state where we live, he can't begin hunting with me till he's 10. Some people might think that 10 sounds a little young to go hunt deer. I don't think so. I will start my son out hunting deer when he's 10. It'll be with me within arm's reach. And then my daughter will be next up, just like with my son. I will have her hunt turkeys the year she turns 10. She'll hunt deer the year she turns 10. Then when they turn 12, they have to pass hunter safety and go do coursework and go to a class and do proficiency testing to be able to hunt on their own.
I'm sorry, Audrey. I'm sorry.
That's okay, kid. I've been shot worse than this plenty of times.
Make your scarf into a tourniquet. Take your scarf, make a tourniquet, wrap it around his shoulder.
I got it.
Good.
Sweetheart.
I'm gonna bleed out.
Oh yeah, she redeems herself in the end, gets her turkey, collected herself after crippling someone, which is a little bit startling that you'd continue to hunt after shooting a human being. She's shooting an oversized gun, so it doesn't fit on her shoulder right. They should cut the stock off for her so she can fit it against her shoulder properly, but she's doing as best she can with what she's got. Looks great.
Wow, 2 for 2.
Up next, No Country for Old Men. The Coen brothers, and also, you know, it's based on a novel by Cormac McCarthy, do a great job always. Like they're really careful about details, and they take the time to get the details right. So it makes sense that in a hunting scene, they're gonna do the same. Everything about it looks great. Okay, here we're seeing Josh Brolin, Llewellyn, I think is his name, Moss, gets a bad hit on an antelope, starts blood trailing it. In archery hunting, it's the norm. The norm is that you're going to have to blood trail something. Rifle hunting, it happens, but it doesn't happen as often. With hunting with a rifle for big game, typically you see the animal go down. With archery, typically you do not. Typically you have to track it. And there comes a thing where you're tracking and the blood trail peters out. You get a bad hit, it's not mortally wounded. The rain comes and washes the blood away. All kinds of things can lead to a bad blood trail. The blood has a certain look to it. It's falling at a certain cadence and a certain size of drop. Where it's landing relative to the animal's tracks might suggest that it's just dripping off the animal and not being spurted out from an arterial wound or lung wound. You can tell by the consistency of the blood if it has a lot of oxygen that's coming from the lungs, if it's got a greenness to it, if it's greasy, if it's got little bits of muscle. Like, all these things tell you stuff. And you might be in a situation where you're like, I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, we're not going to find it. But a good hunter keeps looking and looks and looks and looks and looks and doesn't give up on it until you've exhausted everything you can possibly try. But it does happen. You get to a point where you can't follow anymore. You just run out of blood. And then you cut circles, you do everything logical, go to where you think it would have went. Maybe you know where it would cross the river and check to see if it crossed the river there and do all that stuff. But yeah, at a point, you got to give up. I think a lot of people give up way too easy and leave stuff in the woods that didn't need to be left in the woods. It should go on. You go back the next day and try again. And at a point you run up where enough time has gone by that if it is dead, it's rotten now. So if it's like a day like this, the kind of heat he's in, If he was tracking his antelope and he didn't find it today, that thing's gonna be rotten anyway. It's too hot. It'll be bloated and stinky, full of flies by the time you find it. So you gotta find it quick. He's still kind of on the trail, winds up looking down, seeing all these shot up trucks, and goes down here to have a look.
You stop to watch your backtrack. You'll shoot my dumb ass. But if you stopped in shade.
The character is, schooled in warfare. He's a Vietnam veteran, and he's tracking a man, and he has some interesting observations. He's wondering if he's going to stop to watch his backtrack to see if someone's coming behind him. But he also knows, just based on the conditions out in the desert, he says he's going to stop in shade. Here we get up to the end, and he's looking ahead, and he finds a couple shade trees, and he's very carefully studying that area under there. We hunt coos deer in desert environments like this. In the middle of the day, in a hot day, you would look for those same shade patches under trees. Like, the more open ground there is, the more enticing one little shade tree is, and you'll stop way back and watch binoculars to see if there are deer holed up in that shade. In movies, there's this idea that everything has to be like overblown and dramatic, when in fact, things happen very slowly and quietly. This is why it's such a better scene here. It's a tense scene, but he's doing it methodically, slowly, quietly, with precision. It winds up being such a better movie. It's such a more impactful scene when you see it done the way it would be done. If you watch this movie, you get to the end of this movie, there's a great scene where Tommy Lee Jones is talking about having a dream in which they're on horseback and his father rides out ahead of him.
When he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon.
His father was carrying a horn of fire. Now, how many millions of people saw this movie and read that book and didn't know what the hell he was talking about? What he's talking about is, in the old days, people would take a buffalo horn or a cow horn, wake up in the morning and take embers from your fire and fill the hollow horn with embers. Then they would plug the end of the horn and poke a little pinhole in it so that a small amount of oxygen could get in there and keep those embers alive. And you could travel all day and then dump the embers out and blow on them and kindle a fire. So in the end, everybody sees the scene and the guy goes, and he was carrying with him a horn of fire. No explanation what the hell he's talking about, but people in the know would know what he meant was he was going ahead and he was going to be able to kindle a fire at night because he was carrying an old buffalo horn full of embers. That was a remote edition of The Breakdown with GQ. I'm Steven Rinella, and thank you for watching.